Genesis 18, 1 through 15. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. We'll just jump into the passage breakdown. So it begins with, the Lord appeared to Abram near the great trees of Mamre. We've seen God do this several times, appear to Abram. In chapter 17, he appeared to Abram when Abram was 99 years old. This is still a year or so, 9 months before Isaac will be born at 100 years old. So we are within 3 months max of the last appearance. The Lord appeared to Abram near the great trees of Mamre. Remember that this is Mamre the Amorite, who had been allied with Abram at the time, now Abraham, in Genesis chapter 14. So Abraham has wandered around, and he's made his way back to the great trees of Mamre, and he's standing out there, is sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. So we know it's hot outside, and he's just seeking some shade. And there is where the Lord appears to him, except for this appearance of the Lord really explains what happens down here. That's not exactly how it happens from Abram's perspective. Instead, verse 2, Abram looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. So as Abram is just kind of maybe dozing or daydreaming or just staring off in the distance on this hot day, these 3 men just appear, right? Now we know it's the Lord appearing here. And the fact that he didn't see them coming, the fact that could mean either he was sleeping, or it could mean that or that these men have a divine origin. Whatever the case may be, what Abraham does know is that he has some guests, right? When he saw them, use that blue for when, right? Because it's important. When he saw them, he hurried. He didn't wait. He just ran over. He hurried. The word here literally is ran. He ran. So you have a 99-year-old man running to his guests from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. So Abraham does not yet know exactly who these people are. Maybe there's some inkling of their divine origin, but that's not clear as of yet. They are just simply strangers, and yet Abram demonstrates incredible humility. And so this begins with, wait for this to show up. Beginning in verse 1, the Lord appears. But we don't exactly know how, because in verses 2 through 3, Abraham greets guests with humility. And as a part of those details, we know that it's a hot summer day, right? And Abraham's invitation is, well, why don't you come inside and kick your feet off and find some refreshment? He said, if I have found favor in your eyes, then, we're going to supply the then do not pass your servant by. Instead, let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Then let me get you something to eat so that you can be refreshed, and then go on your way now that you have come by your servant. All of these little pieces to this whole thing. It starts with, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, right? This is really the word Adonai, which we think of only being referring to God, but it could be a general term for Lord. It shows that Abraham has incredible respect for the people around him. It's not hard to see why he made friends with Mamre the Amorite or his brothers. It's not hard to see why Abraham was so respected when he treats his guests this way. He says, if I found favor in your eyes, don't pass your servant by. Instead, let some water come out. Let's wash your feet. Why don't you rest under the tree? Let me get you something to eat so that you can be refreshed and go on your way now that you've come to your servant, right? So there's this, that's just verse 3. So let me go down back to here. So just verse 2 right there. So kind of the rising action here is Abraham invites strangers in. He just invites the strangers in. This, in America today, we just think of fear, right? It really terrifies us to invite strangers into our lives, into our homes. In the Middle East today, this is still the way that they do hospitality, and we have a lot to learn from this. We have a lot of fear to get us away from something that's really central to the Christian life. Very well, they answer, do as you say. So Abram hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said, get 3 seahs of the finest flour. This is going to make the tasty bread, the good bread. Knead it and bake some bread. Okay. And this is a command that Abraham is giving his wife. Then he ran. Again, he's hurrying. He's moving. He is scrambling. He ran to the herd. He selected a choice tender calf. He looked at all of his little baby calves and he said, that one's going to be tender. That one's going to be tasty. He gave it to the servant who hurried again to prepare it. So chop, chop, get this thing cooked up. Then he brought out some curds and some milk and the calf that had been prepared, and he set these before them. So if we're looking at their meal now, they have a calf, they have milk, they have curds, and they have some bread. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree. Abraham doesn't even eat. He is a waiter. He is waiting on them. He is serving them to the fullest. This is no small meal to kill the calf. This is a big deal. So in verses 7 through 8 here, verses 7 through 8, Abraham demonstrates incredible hospitality. And so this display of hospitality is fantastic. And they eat their meal, and Abram is just waiting. And then verse 9 is the next verse. Where is your wife, Sarah? They asked him. At this point, it's important to realize something. In all of the interactions between God and Abraham so far, Sarah has never been present. Sarah's never heard the voice of God. She's never seen God. She's never heard all these things. They have all come to her secondhand through Abraham. So her husband, Abraham, has been telling her for all these years that they're going to get married, that they're going to, or not that they're going to get married, they're already married, but that they're going to have a kid, that they need to follow God. And obviously she's really struggled with that and living in quite a bit of doubt. And what happens here then is that the point of this final visit is not so much Abraham as it is Sarah. Where is your wife, Sarah? They asked him. Second thing to notice here is that Sarah, not Sarai, is what they ask. That's significant because Sarah, at max, has had this name for 3 months, right? Very few people would know her as Sarah at this point, but they do. And so we're beginning to get a second hint at their divine origin. He answers there in the tent. So now verse 9, we have this big shift in focus. Suddenly, Sarah is brought into view. I mean, at this point, Hagar has had more experience of God than Sarah has. Verse 10. Then one of them said, and we could assume that this is God, because of the first person, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. This is almost exactly what was said in chapter 17 during the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham was able to hear that one, but Sarai didn't hear it. And now Sarai is in the tent next to them and within earshot, and God wants Sarah to hear these words: your wife will have a son about this time next year. So that's 10a. The promise is delivered to Sarah. Now note where Sarah is in the second half of this. That's 10a. This would be 10b right here. Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. So it's not like Sarah's hiding behind the tent. She's at the entrance to it. You can see her. It's just that the man has his back turned to Sarah. So he's very much intending for Sarah to listen, and Sarah's not eavesdropping. She's very obviously listening and watching and tending to the meal. So, 10b, Sarah is a witness, right? This promise is very much and intentionally delivered to Sarah. Now, verses 11 and 12 give us a little bit more of kind of Sarah's insight in all of this. And this is like kind of the peak of the action here. We'd be, somewhere in here. Verses 11 through 12. And we get Sarah's inner dialogue. And what we discover is that there's quite a bit of doubt in there. So, Abram and Sarah were already very old. At this point, Abraham is 99, Sarah is 90 or 89. Sarah was past the age of childbearing. Literally, this could be translated, the way of the woman has left her. It means that she's post-menopause. So when she had her period, she was barren. Now, this is gone. And she is doubly barren. So Sarah laughed to herself. Now remember, the son's name is Isaac, which means laughter. And Abraham also laughed at these words. But the inner dialogue is right here. After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? The pleasure of, I think here, raising a child? The pleasure of being able to have a kid. Now this is going to happen. And I think her laugh here is not like Abram's laugh. When Abraham heard this word in chapter 17, he believed. It was just so unbelievable, but he believed it. And so that's why there's this kind of incredulous laugh. Sarah, however, her laugh is of doubt. Her laugh is that pessimistic laugh, like, yeah, right, kind of a laugh, right? And so in this kind of like pinnacle of the action, unfortunately, Sarah is shown to be doubtful. And that's a big deal because Abram was justified by faith, but we don't yet see the faith in Sarah. And we know that back in chapter 17, when we had this covenant of circumcision, that faithfulness on Abraham's was required. So then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? And say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Right, up here. And then he says, is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. So kind of here in verse 13, we have the affirmation. Affirmation of the promise and chastisement. Part 1. The question, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child? And we can tell just by God's handling of Abraham's laughter versus God's handling of Sarah's laughter, that Sarah's laughter is doubt. And we'll see that as a second time in Sarah's reaction to this comment. And that she's ashamed of it. So, if we were to compare this with chapter 17, it's kind of like similar with this increasing promise. But at the top here of chapter 17, Abram believed and obeyed God with circumcision. Here at the pinnacle, it's the opposite lesson. Sarah is doubting. How will God handle Sarah's doubt? Verse 13, why did Sarah laugh? He's going to inquire about it. He's going to give a little bit of encouragement. Is anything too hard for the Lord? But it's kind of one of those questions that's like, it's a loaded question. It reveals her doubt. And then the affirmation of the promise. I will return next year and Sarah will have a son. Verse 15, Sarah was afraid. And just in case you think like Sarah's not part of the conversation, so she lied and said, I did not laugh, right? She is involved in this conversation, even though the Lord addressed Abraham. And she kind of interjects and say, I didn't laugh, right? She thought nobody heard her chuckle, right? It's interesting, right? Because Hagar called God the one who sees me. And she named her son Ishmael, which means God who hears, right? So, like, Hagar knows that God sees her when nobody else does. Hagar knows that God hears her when nobody else does. But Sarah still doesn't know, right? And so she's hiding her sin. In fact, in this way, she's very much like Eve, who when she did something wrong, hid herself. And Sarai is afraid. She's got the same. So she hides the truth and she says, I did not laugh, right? So kind of the falling action here. That's verse 13 through 14. So now in verse 15, kind of the part of this, Sarah lies, right? She feels the shame. And then B, right? This next part, 15b, and then verse 15b, God affirms the truth. Yes, you did laugh, Sarah. So it's this really interesting story where we don't get the happy ending. I mean, we still get the arc and all that, but instead of having like a really happy story here, like we've had so many of, we got a sad story here. But it's not all sad. You see, in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11, we discover that Sarah has a child by faith. This whole episode here, yes, it's about Sarah's doubt. But even more so, perhaps, it's about God chastising Sarah in order to bring about what Hebrews 11:11 tells us is faith. For Abram, it was looking up at the stars at night that solidified his faith. But for Sarah, she needed the rebuke. In either case, God knows his children, he knows what we need, and he knows how to build our faith. And for Sarah, this one who had been doubting for all these years, she needed a little bit of discipline. She needed a little bit of chastisement, but she also needed to see this one called Yahweh that everybody had been talking about, but that she hadn't seen. Hagar had seen her, Abraham had seen her, but never Sarah. And so God reveals himself to her, and I think what happens, if Hebrews 11:11 is right, is that Sarah believes and Abram believes, and I'll bet that this night, for the first time, they tried to have a child again at 99 and 89 years of age. But for the first time, they tried in faith. In faith in God's promises, and 9 months later, a child was born. So there we go. That is Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 15.